My mom watched my grandfather rape my aunt, still sent me there every summer. And so I grew up with a lot of sexual abuse, a lot of physical abuse, a mom that was always running off, leaving me at my grandparents'. I took him to court. I finally told somebody when I was like 9, and I took him to court, and I needed her to testify for me, and she looked at me and was like, I can't choose between my father and my daughter. And so we went through the whole court proceedings. I ended up losing. I ended up in a foster home at 11 years old. I didn't see my mom at all during that time, but they were really good people, the foster home I ended up in. We were living in Lakeview at the time, and so they needed a placement for me, where all the other girls were there because they had done bad things. I was there because bad things had been done to me, so it was a bit of an adjustment. They were really strict, but they were Christian people, and that's where I came to know God. So I stayed there until I was like 17. I got really involved in church. I went to church 3 times a week. I thought that my calling in life was to go and be a missionary. And so we had it set up for my for Bible college once I got my GED. And I was going to go to school to become a missionary. And somebody in my church told me that I couldn't go spread God's word and teach God's word unless I had made amends with my real mom. I got there and I couldn't make amends with her. Like every time I would come to her and talk to her about the things that I was feeling or her part in everything, she would tell me that I was a child and I didn't know. And so I was really frustrated, and I started getting into drinking and drugs. And I felt like I was never going to get to my goal and that I was never going to be able to forgive her. So I thought that in my mind that if I couldn't forgive her, God couldn't forgive me. And so I took 980 pills out of the medicine cabinet at my mom's. Nobody knew anything was wrong. I just was over it. I was just tired, and I was just done. When they found me, the ambulance got there. They thought I was dead. I woke up about 5 days later in ICU, and I was still alive. And I realized at that point that if it ain't your time, it's not your time. Like, there was a girl that came in the same night that I did, and she took a less deadly combination of drugs and a less amount of drugs, and she died. And I realized that God had other plans for me, but I wasn't so ready to deal with that yet. Went into Job Corps right after that, got kicked out of that, turned 18, met a computer scientist that I got involved with. And we were together for about 8 months, and he wouldn't marry me till I was a size 9. And so I told him I knew a way. And this guy never did drugs, never ever did drugs, never once. That's how he made his money, was his brain. So he didn't do drugs. And so I knew my mom had done meth, and so that's when the meth use started. I got down to a size 9, and I left the dude. And he paid for an apartment downtown, and that's when I learned about selling drugs. I fell in love with that lifestyle right away. And so I was living there in that apartment, and I started selling drugs, and I went to my husband to sell him drugs, and I ended up taking him drugs and never leaving. We got drunk one night and had sex, and next thing you know, I was pregnant with my oldest son. And I quit using drugs at that point. The abuse with my husband just got worse and worse, to the point where I ended up having an affair. down the road with this guy. And I remember there's this lady being in my apartment in our house, and she was talking about how she had lost her kids and I remember I was cleaning my house and looking at my son, and I remember thinking, I'm never going to be that girl. Little did I know that was going to be my life. I ended up splitting up with my ex-husband. My son went to my mom's at that point. Me and my ex-husband, he had more money. Like, his parents own a business in here in Portland, and like, they've got more money than God. And I knew God this whole time, but I just wasn't talking to him. I was over it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was so mad at the whole thing with God of, like, I wanted to go give my life to you. How did I get derailed like this? Not knowing that it was me that did it, but at the time, that's where my head was, you know? I was married at 21. At 20, so I stayed with this guy. I left him, got together with another guy, got pregnant again. I got back together with my husband for a minute, trying to make it work, thinking that somehow I could make this work, even though the other child wasn't his. Ended up shooting him. We just got into a huge fight, and he beat the crud out of me. And I was black and blue, and I was bloody, and I was just over it, man. I was so over it. I was in the kitchen, and he walked across the living room, and he sat down on the couch like this. And I remember there being a gun in that drawer in that kitchen, and we'd fought about him even getting that gun. I thought it was a bad idea. And I remember that gun being there, and he proceeded to walk across the living room after beating the crud out of me. And he lay down on the couch like that, and he was like, basically telling me there was nothing I could do about it. And like, this was my life. Either I dealt with it, or he was going to make sure I never saw my kid again. And I remember grabbing that 22, and I picked it up, and I remember aiming it at him, and I aimed it at his head. It actually shot him in the arm. If it hadn't have bounced off the bone in his arm, it would have gone right through his head. It was 5 centimeters away from the center of his head. And I remember thinking, oh my God, what have I done? And I remember picking up the phone, and just at that point, as I was picking up the phone to call 911, 2 of our friends walked in. And I called 911, and I grabbed my briefcase, and I left the gun, and I walked out the door. And I walked right through the apartment complex. And I got to that street, and the ambulance was coming in, and I'm like, oh my God, my life is over. I've just committed a crime that there's nothing that I'm going away for a long time. I'm never going to see my kids again. It was the scariest day of my life. I went where my friend was staying in this trailer, and I opened the door, and I remember falling to my feet and crying like a baby. And I'm like, I just shot my husband. Some friends came and picked me up. They put me on the floorboard of a car, covered me in blankets, and drove through these police. So took me to this hotel. He told the paramedics that it was an accident so he could blackmail me into taking his possession charge. And then called me, met up with me, said that if I didn't cop to his possession charge, that he was going to tell the truth of what really happened. I had a bunch of money on me, a bunch of money on me. And so, but it wasn't my money. It belonged to the people I worked for. And I took that money, and I went and I got a lawyer.